basically, we're treating everybody the same, but we need a piece of legislation to do it in this case.
We ought to just pass everything, third reading tonight and be done with it.
That's certainly a possibility.
Definitely need the corrective finance legislation passed tonight, all the adjustments.
Yeah.
So,
I saw that. That's the end of the year transfer funds.
yeah,
Yeah.
we tried to get that to you in 2 ordinances, but with all the CARES Act stuff going on.
I think we can take care of that.
We're still waiting for our BWC money
According to the 70th anniversary Charlie Brown Timex that I recently received as a birthday present from Mrs. Russell, it is now 7 o'clock. So we will call this December 15th Findlay City Council meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Greeno.
Here.
Mr. Haas.
Here.
Mr. Hellman.
Here?
Mr. Niemeyer.
Here.
Mr. Palmer.
Here.
Mr. Russell.
Here.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Here.
Mr. Slough.
Here.
Ms. Warnicki. And Mr. Wolfser.
Present.
And previously, Councilwoman Warnicki and Council President Harrington had informed us that they would be absent from today's meeting. I'd entertain a motion to excuse them. Mr. Hellman, second. Mr. Slough, all those in favor of excusing John and Beth, please say aye.
Aye.
And they are excused. And with that, we will stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen. We have acceptance to the December 1st regular minutes of the regular session of City Council. Mr. Slough,
I would move to approve the minutes as circulated.
second. Mr. Palmer, questions or comments? All in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay, and the minutes are approved. Mr. Wolfser, do we have any replacements, add-ons, or removals from the agenda?
We have 2 replacements tonight. We have a replacement for Resolution 032-2020. We also have a replacement for Ordinance 2020-141. Both of those have been given to each council member.
And that was in the form of a motion? It sounded like it.
Yes, it was.
Great. Mr. Schindeldecker?
Second.
And all in favor of the 2 replacements to the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
And the agenda has the replacements that are done. We have no proclamations, retirements, oral communications, or petitions, or written communications, reports of municipal officers and municipal departments.
City Income Tax Monthly Collections Report for November 2020.
Questions or comments? Reports be filed.
Findlay Municipal Court Activities Report for November 2020.
Questions or comments? Reports be filed.
Findlay Fire Department Activities Report for November 2020.
Questions or comments? Reports be filed.
Summary financial reports as of November 30th, 2020.
Questions or comments? Reports be filed.
Treasurer's Reconciliation Report for November 30th, 2020.
Questions or comments? Reports be filed.
Financial summary from Mayor Mern.
Questions or comments? Reports be filed.
A letter from Mayor Acting Service Director Mern regarding annual Community Park Improvement Program grant.
Questions or comments? Letter be filed.
Findlay Police Departmental Activities Report for November 2020.
Questions or comments? Reports be filed.
Letter from City Engineer Brian Thomas regarding 2020 Preventive Maintenance Project number 328-00200.
Questions or comments? Letter be filed.
Letter from Mayor Mern regarding District 13 Integrating Committee appointment.
Questions or comments? Letter be filed.
Letter from City Auditor Jim Stashak regarding the year-end items to transfer and appropriate. He's asking that the first paragraph be read.
Mr. Wobser,
Make a motion that we read the first paragraph of this letter into the record.
second, Mr. Haas. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And the first paragraph shall be read.
The following accounts require an appropriation or transfer for this budget year so that the city may remain in compliance with ORC and audit. It is important that the rules be suspended and the legislation for these transfers be passed at your December 15th meeting in order to remain in compliance. I have listed below the amount of each request and the corresponding reason for the appropriation or transfer.
Questions or comments? Jim, do you want to take questions on this now or wait till legislation?
Council's pleasure.
Mr. Wobser.
I think, council members, the one thing that we did want to discuss on here is the transfer of funds to the severance payout reserve fund. And we had a little bit of discussion on this at our budget meeting, and tonight we need to decide what we want to do one way or another. Jim, could you come up and tell us a little bit about what you put into the legislation?
Sure. Is this on? Or do I need this anymore? This one?
Yeah, it should be on.
Yeah.
Well, let's hope it's on. Good. And talking with you folks and Councilman Wobser's head of appropriations, what we had done and to accommodate the request and the discussion that you've had, I think about 3 times throughout the year, the severance payout reserve fund is put in place so that when individuals retire, whether we know they're going to retire early on or we don't know, it's so your general fund doesn't get hit with large payouts. Payouts from tens of thousands of dollars sometimes. They're seen as high as $80,000 or $90,000 in some cases. The fund was originally created using 3 to 4 years of the known retirements at that time. 3 to 4 year look forward is what I've been informed. I wasn't involved with that. I wasn't an auditor at that point in time. And what we've been in the habit of doing since the recession is trying to ensure that we keep as close to $1 million for a forward look ahead as we could, regardless of how far that went. And you're now in a pretty solid position in terms of cash balances and have been for a couple of years. We've talked about this, but there hasn't been a real effort to fund the obligation that's there. The dollars that are listed here in that paragraph through 2025 are known dollars. In other words, individuals that we know through the service that they've had with the city are eligible to retire and what their payouts would be totaled for each of those years. So at the end of 2021, if everybody retired, and we know everybody won't, but if you had a large amount of retirements and they all retired, your obligations that are currently unfunded would take you, per your last snapshot, about $600,000 in the hole. So you're underfunded in terms of the severance payouts that you have obligated to pay today, should those individuals retire. The $1 million, in addition to that, which is noted here, covers a significant portion of those obligations through the next, again, through 2025 or 2024. Actually, I don't think we get too far into 25 with the $1 million there, based on the known retirements. And then some of you will recall last time we discussed this, we do get a significant amount of people who we don't know are going to retire that show up and do. And that's primarily because they have service credit other places through the military or with other entities that we're not aware of. And another part of the discussion was a lot of times employees don't want us to know exactly when they're going to retire. So my main point that I'd like to drive home to you folks in making your decision is by setting aside the funds. It is a known obligation, and you are in a strong cash position to fund a significant portion of that known obligation. and the obligation isn't going to go away. So if we would be in an economic environment over the next 24 months that took us the direction that the recession took us back in 07 and 08, it could put you in a bind if you burned through those funds and didn't set them aside and had other pressures or another council. As we know, you guys are in the middle of your term, so there'll be a run for council next year, so there's potentially new council members in the year after if they don't fund this. So with your seats being 2-year seats, with you being in a strong cash position, I would like to urge you to fund as much of this as you're comfortable doing. You're in a position where you can fund the entire thing, the 1.6 million, fund it in a strong way and not hurt yourself in terms of where you're at in your balance based on what we know and based on the 2-year budget projections. So I think you're in good shape. Does that help?
Jim, yes, so Jim, the 369 that is actually in the ordinance, that's for next year only, correct?
No, that's current ones this year. In other words, we budgeted for
Okay.
known retirements this year. We pay them out of the salary line, and whenever you pass your budget, your appropriations ordinances, it either goes to personal services or other.
Okay.
We take it out of personal services, and then we true it up at the end of the year so that there's enough money to pay the salaries in the last month and everything's square and we're proper for audit. That's what the 369 does. So the 1595, the 1.5 million is the difference between everybody who's retired and received or are receiving their payouts currently under the 369 and funding your severance payout reserve to the amount of $1 million beyond the known obligations through 2021.
Through 2025.
No, 2021 is
Set the
no, excuse me, $1 million beyond through 2021.
Takes you to
Right,
2025.
and then these numbers take you through 2025. So I presented those to you so you knew 1 million isn't an arbitrary number.
So Jim, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dennis, excuse me.
No, I'm just gonna say the 1.15 million then is if everybody were to retire at the same time, is that correct?
No, the number is calculated as to what the obligation is based on who's eligible to retire. So to some extent, yes.
The eligibility piece, I forgot
Yes,
that.
so much like a pension system.
Yeah.
You're all accruing benefits in pension systems if you have one, or in your 401ks or however you're doing. You're accruing those benefits today, knowing that at some point there will be a payout, whether it be in monthly installments or lump sum. These are lump sum payouts that the city's obligated to make when those individuals turn in their notice.
But
to
they are,
meetings
but
at the
to
time.
clarify, they are eligible.
Yes.
Okay.
That this is only, if they're not eligible, they are not included
Gotcha.
in these numbers.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah.
Mr. Wiltshire.
The conversation that we had at the budget meeting was really centered around the 1.59, 1.6 million. And there were some other council members that had a thought that maybe we could do a portion of that, and I think that would be agreeable. What we need to do, if we want to do that, is we need to come up with that number and just make a quick amendment to this legislation. So I'd be interested to hear from members what they think. If you don't like the 159, what do you think would be appropriate?
Mr. Schindler.
Much as the discussion we had several months ago when we put some additional money into the rainy day fund, which I agree we needed to do that and we should have been doing it all along. I was not happy doing it in the spring, although obviously we did. I feel kind of the same way about this. This retirement is a moving target, and I'm not comfortable putting all of this money into that account at this time. We know we'll have to do it when the time comes, and yes, we'll have to be careful, but it just bothers me to do the whole thing at once. I would prefer to amend it to a smaller amount.
Mr. Hillman.
I agree with what Councilman Schindeldecker just said. And I guess to throw out a number just to start the conversation, what would you think of doing half of it? $750,000 thereabouts.
If you're asking me, the interest in the consensus of the other council members,
Understand?
my first thought was maybe $500,000, which would be less than half the amount. I mean, we aren't even in January yet, and this is to last us 12 and a half months. No, 12 months, because this year's taken care of. I'd be open to any amount that other council people would suggest.
I'm gonna call on myself, but Jim, I have a couple more questions for you. Just the structure of this, so we bring money into this, we kind of fund the severance payout reserve fund, and then when it's actually time for people to retire, you do a transfer to that personal services account that's listed here?
An appropriation.
An appropriation?
Yes.
Okay, and so that 369 says that we know that those people have already,
Didn't pay.
they've been paid, and so we're reimbursing that.
Yes.
Okay. Could you kind of come up to the mic for these so that... And so the current level of the severance payout reserve fund is $1 million less what will be the 369?
No, if you look at your last snapshot that is in the council
Yeah.
packet today, I think it said initially there was 900,000 and change there. We obligated 300,000 that we paid and appropriated throughout the year, and now another 300 and change. So you're at just above 600,000 as the projected balance.
Okay.
So 600,000 would put you at 1.2 million, 500,000 would put you at 1.1 million. Your obligation through next year, if you basically 595, puts you at covers 2021. So 600,000 would cover 2021 in its entirety, and not say anything aside for the numbers anticipated after that. So
Yeah.
as you're throwing numbers around, there's some logic there, and that's helpful to you, the 600,000 number.
And in the first paragraph, you mentioned that these transfers are required so that we may remain in compliance with Ohio Revised Code and audit. I read that as to say those amounts are necessary because Ohio Revised Code
The 300.
or an audit requirement tells us that has to be. Is that not the case in this specific number?
That is true for the 369,000.
Okay.
And the additional amount was added for conversation with this body and Councilman Wiltshire.
So if we-
and it was actually requested to put it in this piece of legislation, was the discussion, so that's why that's there. Under the understanding that you are going to have this discussion and determine whether or not you want to move forward with that amount.
So a change in the amount doesn't get us in trouble with Ohio Revised Code or with audit.
Not on that particular line.
Okay.
No. All the other lines we need.
Great, thank you. Mr. Wiltshire.
Thank you, Councilman Russell. I think where I'm coming down on this is right about the $600 to $700 range, $100,000 range. And here's why. As Jim was talking about, this pays our severance out. Next year, we know is we're going to be in a deficit spending situation, more than likely even with given, unless we get a lot of federal aid, kind of like we did this year, but we can't count on that at this point. The one thing that I like about having this funded and funded well is that it gives our employees the knowledge that that money will be there. And so it may actually help us delay some people retiring if they know that the money's been appropriated. If it's not, and we just kind of feed it as we go along, I think that wouldn't give me a really good, strong feeling about staying around much longer than I knew there was money there. And let's face it, when you're dealing with a public entity, money's here today, could be gone tomorrow. We've been dealing with it all year. So that is my reasoning for at least putting in $700,000 into this. So I would make a motion that we amend the 1.595 $400,000 to $700,000.
Mr. Slough.
I would second that motion.
We have a motion to amend the, this will be ordinance, what would this be? Resolution 032/2020.
Yeah.
And so why don't we do that?
Do we
at the
want to
time
wait?
we
Yes,
bring-
I'm sorry, I
we
got
bring
ahead of
that up.
ourselves
Yeah.
there. Oh, the mayor has something, Grant.
Nerman.
If I may, and certainly, I'm comfortable with whatever you all decide. I just want to point out that when we talk about a deficit budget, the 1.595 was put into the budget as part of those discussions. And so that decrease will actually help our budget. I agree, I just want to point out that as we look at this, that 369, obviously we need to do that. That meets our current obligations. For 2021, 2022, we're going to be $1 million over. That takes us through 2025. So I'm all for planning ahead, making sure that we're appropriately prepared. As I mentioned in the budget hearings, I would rather do it in incremental. So looking at what do we need for 2021? Okay, Q1, let's maybe put that aside. Let's assess our cash position. Let's look at what our revenue's coming in at, and then continue to kind of put towards that so that we're preparing for the future, but that we're also not getting ahead of ourselves. And so I think that that's just appropriate to keep in mind. 700,000 number that Councilman Wobser threw out. I would be comfortable with that. Again, we're in a strong cash position, but I also want to make sure that we keep in mind that we're looking in multiple years ahead, and I don't want us to put ourselves in a restricted position. I'm highly unlikely that we're going to get in a position where putting these funds aside is an issue, but just want to make sure that we keep that in mind. This is not something that has to be done immediately, and I'm always, I like to kind of assess the situation and make minor tweaks rather than making larger decisions all at once. So just wanted to point that out.
Other questions or comments? Letter be filed. Got to find out where we're at. How about committee reports?
Planning and Zoning Committee, to whom was referred a request from Rooney and Ranzel Ltd., Philip Rooney on behalf of Amber Waves Development Incorporated to rezone the Amber Waves Development Incorporated East Bigelow Avenue annexation to I-1 Light Industrial. We recommend approval of the initial zoning as I-1 Light Industrial as requested.
Would anybody want to make a motion to accept that committee report?
Accept it. I would move that we accept the committee report.
Second, Mr. Slough. Questions or comments? And do note that because this is the first time, because we're bringing this property into the city, it's not a rezone, it's the initial zoning for the property. It does mirror the zoning that the property has, and I believe it was Marion County. Other questions or comments? Seeing as though there's none, all in favor of accepting the committee report, please say aye.
Aye.
And the committee report is accepted. Legislation.
Second reading for Resolution 32/2020 as amended. A resolution to approve charging utility customers a fee for processing credit debit card payments at the counter of the City of Findlay Utility Billing Office.
Mr. Wobser.
I believe we need to get this done this year. I would like to make a motion to suspend council's rules and give this resolution its last reading.
Second, Mr. Greeno. All those in favor of suspending council's rules and giving resolution 032/2020 its third reading, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindledecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
And Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Council's rules have been suspended, and this resolution will be given its third reading.
Resolution 32/2020 as amended.
Mr. Greeno.
I would move that resolution number 032-2020 be approved.
Second, Mr. Slough. Questions or comments? Jim, how much, there was some conversation prior to the meeting. could you kind of summarize why this needs to be done now and what we're really doing here, and then also what kind of dollars, do you have an idea on the general idea on the dollar amounts we're talking?
$0 to the city. What we do currently is when a customer of the city chooses to pay by credit card, whether it be the income tax department or even right now in utility billing, they use a third-party processor which has been bought out, so there's a name change going on as part of this whole thing as well. And if it's $1,000 that they owe us, they pay $1,000. There's a convenience fee that the credit card provider charges. That fee is charged back to the customer, typically I would assume through their card, and goes forward. So this legislation, utility billing has asked us to have the ability for customers to use cards at the counter, where they don't touch the cards, the customer does it in a machine. They would still enter the information in the computer. This legislation is required by the card service provider so that those fees can be charged back to the customer. So it's a formality, an administrative piece that they need and have told us they need. And utility billing is waiting. We own the card readers, we're ready to go, but we can't move forward until we have this legislation in place, because the third-party company will not schedule installing the card readers until we send them a copy of this.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Jim, what kind of a convenience or service fee are we talking about? On that $1,000 water bill, what would be? What percentage?
Yeah, I have to tell you, it's a typical, it's standard, but I don't know the exact amount because I'm not a big credit card user. And like, I don't want to get myself in trouble, but my wife pays my bills. So,
Only the auditor.
Yes, but it's reasonable, I know, and customers are comfortable doing it, we know that, and customers want this, so it's not just utility billing that wants it. We get that request, and if Andrew was here from income tax, he would tell you also that the customers really appreciate the convenience that we give them, and the people who do it frequently. They don't just do it once and say, oh my goodness, they continue to do it.
Other questions? Seeing those, there's none. Thank you, Jim.
Yep.
All those in favor of resolution 032-2020, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
The resolution is adopted.
First reading for Resolution 33-2020, a resolution transferring funds within appropriated funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Slough.
I would move we suspend the rules of council and give resolution 33-2020 its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Greeno. We have a motion to suspend rules. All those in favor of suspending rules, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
The rules have been suspended, and this resolution will be given its second and third reading.
Resolution 33-2020, Resolution 33-2020.
Mr. Slough.
Move for adoption of resolution 33-2020.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Questions or comments? Mr. Olter, now would be the time to offer the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. I would like to make a motion that we amend this would be section 3 amount to 700,000 from 1.595,400 to 700,000 even.
Second, Mr. Slough. Discussion on the motion to amend. I would personally be in favor of amending it even lower and bringing this to an appropriations committee to discuss this with a little bit more clarity. There obviously, with the numbers going around and the questions that I'm hearing being asked, there is I think that there's there's not a lot of clarity amongst all of council. I'm definitely not understanding the entire, grasping the entire situation and numbers. There's two different views on this, obviously, going around. Mr. Welcher said that he expressed one of his reasons as a kind of an assurance to the employee base of folks who might be nearing a retirement. I think one thing that the last two administrations has clearly shown to their employees that they run a very stable, fiscally conservative, fiscally strong ship, and just because council would be looking to put some more analysis into this, I would think that the results that would have a minimal effect on the employee, on the close to retirement employee base. So while I appreciate the comments, I don't particularly agree with them. So I'll personally vote against the amendment, and if given an opportunity, we'll offer an amendment to strike Section 3 in its entirety. Mr. Wobser.
I still stand by the amendment from the standpoint that we are doing well in our cash. It does help our current budget situation from our conversations last week going into 2021, and I do believe it does indeed help our employees as they look forward, and to us to be good stewards of their money that they are actually owed when they are to retire.
Other questions or comments? Seeing as though there are none, all those in favor of the motion to amend Section 3 to be $700,000 instead of the currently listed amount, please say aye. We're just going to do a voice vote, and we'll see if we need to do a roll call. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Nay. And it sounded like that was a 2 nays, so the motion is approved. So we still have, now we have a resolution 033-2020 as amended, still for consideration. Other questions or comments? All those in favor, I think we had a first and a second, and then all those in favor of resolution 33-2020 as amended, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindelbecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye. And the resolution as amended passes, or is adopted. Ordinances.
Third reading for ordinance 2020-134, an ordinance amending chapter 1100 et sec of the codified ordinances of the city of Findlay, Ohio, known as the zoning code, by rezoning the following described property referred to as 726 South Blanchard Street rezone, which previously was zoned R4 duplex triplex, to C2 commercial district.
Mr. Hellman.
I would move to approve ordinance 2020-134.
Second, Mr. Slough. Questions or comments? All those in favor of ordinance 2020-134, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Schindelbecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye. Ordinance 2020-134 is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2020-136, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Slough.
I would move the statutory rules of council be suspended and ordinance 2020-136 be given its second and third reading.
How about just a third?
Its third reading? That's what I thought all along.
Mr. Niemeyer. Second. I'm sorry. Jim had me thrown off. We have a motion to suspend rules. All those in favor of suspending rules and giving ordinance 2020-136 its third reading, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindledecker.
Aye.
The council rules have been suspended, and this ordinance will be given its third reading.
Ordinance 2020-136.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion to approve.
Second, Mr. Slough. Questions or comments? All those in favor of 2020-136, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindledecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2020-138, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Slough.
I would move the statutory rules of council be suspended and ordinance 2020-138 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Greeno. All those in favor of suspending council's rules and giving this ordinance its second and third reading, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindledecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
And Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Council's rules have been suspended, and this ordinance will be given its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2020-138. Ordinance 2020-138.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion to approve.
Second, Mr. Slough. Questions or comments? All those in favor of approving ordinance 2020-138, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindledecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
And Mr. Haas.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2020-139, an ordinance de-appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Slough.
I would move the statutory rules of council be suspended and ordinance 2020-139 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Palmer. We have a motion to suspend rules. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindledecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
And Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Council's rules have been suspended, and this ordinance will be given its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2020-139, ordinance 2020-139.
Mr. Greeno.
Move for adoption of ordinance number 2020-139.
Second, Mr. Slough. Questions or comments? All those in favor of ordinance 2020-139, please say aye. After your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindledecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
And Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2020-140, an ordinance authorizing the safety director of the city of Findlay, Ohio to purchase a 2019 DM 1330 milling machine for the city of Findlay Street Department and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Hellman.
I would move that the statutory rules of council be suspended and that ordinance 2020-140 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Haas. We have a motion to suspend rules. Those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindledecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
And Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Council's rules have been suspended, and this ordinance will be given its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2020-140, ordinance 2020-140.
Mr. Palmer.
Move for adoption of ordinance number 2020-140.
Second, Mr. Slough. Questions or comments?
I do have a question.
Mr. Hellman.
And it's probably geared primarily towards Mr. Smelser, and that is on some of these options. Is that what we need and want There's like 4 or 5 of them.
That's a loaded question.
You don't need to take all night to do
Specifically
that.
related to that mill,
Yes.
I would say that I would put it squarely into the need category as opposed to a want. And I would base that on the last couple of years' worth of work and the lease payments that we've paid to get that work done. So if you recall last time, we talked a little bit about the history of how the street department has done projects and how we are now targeting work and taking care of some of the milling on these projects ourselves.
Yes.
We compared the equipment that we own now relative to this particular piece of equipment. And when you look at the number of months, which is about 2.5, and the amount of money that we pay, which is $50,000 plus or minus, to be able to lease this particular piece of equipment. In order to mill pavement to grade, it's much more prudent, if that's the practice that we are going to continue, to go ahead and purchase a piece of equipment for $350,000 than continue to pay that lease rate. So that's why I would categorize it as a need. If we're going to operate that way, which I think is prudent, then we need to purchase a piece of equipment instead of paying a lease for it. Now, you mentioned options. And that's because last time we were here, I was talking about how we were going to pay for this. One of the options was we can develop a simple contract of purchase. We can make an annual payment for a piece of equipment or pay it off early, or we can pay cash. Since the last meeting, the alternative for developing a contract for purchase has been eliminated. So your options are to not buy or to buy. The ordinance that is before you is to pay cash to buy that piece of equipment. Now, why is there urgency? Why do you have to suspend? Because instead of buying a 2021 piece of equipment for about $30,000 more, we have the opportunity to buy a brand new piece of equipment that's 2019 that has never been used, but is still new for a significant discount. That piece of equipment is not available to us in perpetuity. It is on hold based upon your decision tonight or in the very near future. The vendor is under no obligation to keep that for us until we make up our minds. So there's some urgency about what we want to do. I think this falls squarely into the no-brainer category based on the financial implications that we discussed previously. So it's before you tonight to suspend readings and pay cash for the piece of equipment.
And one other question. Did you say that the payment option is no longer on the table?
Correct.
And what happened to that, if I might ask?
Was not able to be put together because there are issues regarding whether or not the signing of said agreement would be considered debt.
Okay.
Mr. Wiltshire.
Ask your lawyer.
Paul, the price isn't in the legislation, I guess, although we have the addendum on here with it. Total price of $517, was that like the sticker price?
Correct.
And then, so they're discounting it to us at $368, and we think, correct?
Yeah, you now see the power of state bidding.
Right? So that got us.
Well, regardless of what you think about MSRP, the state bid price is the 368 number.
Okay. And then we expect to get another 50 off of the 368 for the trade-in value?
That's correct. For two pieces of equipment, a curve machine that we no longer use and a smaller milling machine, the asphalt zipper. If you remember the nickname from
Yes,
last
sir.
time, it's a smaller model, does not set grade. It allows you to plane off a certain thickness, but significantly slows progress in terms of final pay for grade and also collecting the grindings.
So we expect that all things being equal, we should be right around 318. If we
Somewhere
get
around
50K
there.
for that,
What I
somewhere in that
expect to
ballpark.
do, unless the vendor is watching listening to all of our discussion about numbers, is approach them and say, I have the ability to buy this equipment, what can you do for me? We have some trade-in negotiations that are at minimum 50. We also have warranty discussions that could take place. They already have committed to an extended warranty on this piece of equipment for $20,000, which I think is well worth it. So all in all, I know that we will not be exposed for more than the maximum purchase price, which is $368. After that, I intend on talking to the vendor about taking these other two pieces of equipment and giving us an extended warranty. The extended warranty will probably actually purchase next year after we run the equipment for a while.
Okay. I'm resisting the urge to ask if it comes with leather seats and a CD player.
To my knowledge, it does not.
Air conditioning?
No.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Might have an umbrella.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We have given this ordinance its first, second, and third reading, and we have a motion to approve. Any other questions? Seeing as though there is none. All those in favor of ordinance 2020-140, please say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Schindeldecker,
Aye.
Mr. Slough,
Aye.
Mr. Wobser,
Aye.
Mr. Greeno,
Aye.
Mr. Haas,
Aye.
Mr. Hellman,
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer,
Aye.
Mr. Palmer,
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye. The ordinance is adopted. Mr. Schmelzer, please go by a BM 1300-30 milling machine.
First reading for ordinance 2020-141, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
And that would be 2020-141 as amended, correct?
Yes.
I would make a motion to suspend, that council's statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2020-141 be given its second and third reading. Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of suspending rules, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Slough,
Aye.
Mr. Wobser,
Aye.
Mr. Greeno,
Aye.
Mr. Haas,
Aye.
Mr. Hellman,
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer,
Aye.
Mr. Palmer,
Aye.
Mr. Russell,
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker,
Aye.
Council's rules are suspended and this ordinance will be given its second and third reading.
ordinance 2020-141 as amended, ordinance 2020-141 as amended.
Mr. Greeno.
Move for adoption of ordinance number 2020-141
As amended.
as amended.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Questions or comments? All those in favor of ordinance 2020-141 as amended, please say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Wobser,
Aye.
Mr. Greeno,
Aye.
Mr. Haas,
Aye.
Mr. Hellman,
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer,
Aye.
Mr. Palmer,
Aye.
Mr. Russell,
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker,
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted. Old business. New business. Mayor Murray.
Well, first of all, I'll send the sign-up sheet for you all to determine who wants to hold the palm leaves and fan the individuals using the new milling machine. Starting next summer, since it does become with air conditioning, we can draw straws, however you all want to decide that. Just wanted to hit on a couple items. I did look up while Mr. Stashak was talking. The fees to run the credit card currently, I'm not sure if there's any changes. It's $6.95 a transaction for a credit card and $1.95 for a debit card. So ran that. Obviously, what an interesting year. I just wanted to say thank you to all of you and certainly our team. I know we talked a little bit about it last week during the budget hearing, so thank you for taking your time to go through that process. Our team has done a fantastic job this year, as you saw in the financial summaries, managing our expenses, being wise managers of our community tax dollars, rolling with the punches. But I also want to say thank you to each of you for your guidance throughout this process and continuing to make sure that our community has operated, continuing to meet in a safe manner, but in person, which I know we have all appreciated. But I know many communities that kind of temporarily suspended business or closed their buildings or made adjustments. And I feel like our community adapted very quickly to be able to continue to operate, to be able to continue to meet our community's expectations while doing so in a safe manner for both our citizens and our employees. I hope you all have a wonderful Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. If I do not see you, I think even though this year has been challenging, I think we have also learned a lot. I think we have also recognized how blessed we are as a community, and I hope that as you spend the holiday season with your family and friends in a safe manner, that you are able to reflect on the year and recognize that we have much to be grateful for, and that we'll continue to be a strong community going into 2021. And I think that there are much better days ahead. Hopefully, as you all saw, related to the vaccine distributions, those are rolling out. Ohio has begun receiving those yesterday. Hancock County is expected to receive our first shipment the week of the 28th. Those will be initially going to healthcare providers, especially on the front lines, EMS workers, and long-term care facility employees and residents. So we will continue to work with public health and the hospital to work on how we communicate and roll that out. At first, it's going to be pretty slow as they work through. The state and federal government really want us to make sure that any initial doses that we get, that we kind of run through the process of how we get those out, what does it look like, all the paperwork, run through the case before they start supplying larger amounts. And certainly they're also ramping up manufacturing. So as I have information, we'll be communicating that out to the public, working closely with public health, CVS, and the hospital. I believe CVS and Walgreens will both be distributors in our community along with the hospital and public health for various phases of that distribution. Then the final item I wanted to mention, some of you may have seen Mr. Hennigan, the new CEO of Marathon, presented yesterday to the Findlay Rotary Club. I know he's hoping to get out a little bit more into the public or communicate publicly a little bit more, but he did a fantastic job just communicating and wanted me to continue to share it with anyone who's willing to listen, that Marathon continues to be completely dedicated to our community. This is their headquarters. They're continuing to invest here. They're going to continue to be a part of this community. And though they have offices elsewhere, which is part of being a national and international company, and through the growth that they've experienced over the last number of years that have positioned them so well, that Findlay is their headquarters, and they are not shifting any of their personnel to other communities. So I just wanted to reiterate that to all of you, and certainly I think we'll continue to see more communication coming out of them as he's gotten his feet under him a little bit more. And then the final item, we'll make sure that we adjust the budget accordingly to the amounts that you already went ahead and appropriated related to the severance payout fund that were in your budget. So that will be a slight decrease of about $700,000 that you'll see there. Any questions or comments for me?
Mary, and I apologize if you mentioned this, how many doses do we think we're going to get in the first round on the 28th?
I believe the first one is only 500.
500?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, so those will be going to those frontline healthcare workers.
So they'll take care of most of our frontline people and healthcare, the hospital, or is this just going to be a small portion of
That will be that will be a good portion of those kind of immediate ER and COVID employees. Certainly, again, it's not mandated. It's going to be kind of up to them to choose. So certainly that's going to only cover a small portion. But then what I expect to see is then we're going to continue each week to kind of see it ramp up.
Do we know which companies?
We're receiving the Moderna one.
So is this the one that's got to be kept at sub-zero?
That is the Pfizer. So it still has to keep cold, but not the ultra cold. So it is a little bit easier to manage. And though we do not have those kind of deep freezers, one of the items that they went over extensively at the vaccine summit at the White House was related to the packaging that they have developed can keep it for up to 10 days with the dry ice that they have prepared. So they can ship it and keep it within that packaging for 10 days with the dry ice that they provide. And then in some instances, they are a day or two later then immediately sending an additional supply of dry ice to be able to maintain it for an additional 5 days.
Is this the company that requires only one injection?
No,
as opposed to
the
two?
one dose is not available yet. The Pfizer and Moderna both require 2 doses.
Moderna does too?
Yes, I believe Pfizer is 28 days and Moderna is 21 days.
Okay.
So anyone, as they sign up and they get their initial one, they'll have to schedule their second dose at that same time to make sure that they're able to get it. Other questions?
I guess, Mayor, I'd just like to underscore what you said about Mr. Hennigan's comments. I thought it was very reassuring what he had to say of their future here in this community, and I thought he did a nice job. Secondly, I guess I'd like to compliment you and Paul and Brian and the entire staff on the budget and the way we've actually spent less than what was budgeted, and the actual numbers, I think, is very reassuring to us as well, and you're doing a good job, as is all the department heads, so thank you.
All right, my pleasure, and certainly the department heads understand and they want to continue to see us operate well and manage our expenses as we've done for the last number of years, and we'll continue to do that each and every day. And you know, I really enjoyed getting to speak with Mr. Hennigan over the last number of months and get to spend a little bit of time with him, and hopefully he doesn't get upset. He was just actually texting me on something during the meeting, so I apologize, I was on my phone. But it's a good relationship. I'm excited to have him at the helm and be able to introduce him to our community a little bit more. So wonderful. Thank you all. Merry Christmas. Stay safe and well.
Any other new business? I'll take a motion to adjourn. Mr. Slough, second. Mr. Guarino, all in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
No.
And Bud, I just hope that Santa Claus brings you a new